Welcome to the world of history, class 8, chapter 1, a period of transition, part 1. Objectives. In today's session, we will learn about what do we mean by transition, what does modern history refers to, what are the sources of modern history, what are the characteristics of modern age, which movements and events gave rise to the modern age. Let's start with the chapter. You all have already learned in your earlier classes about the three main periods of history, that is ancient, medieval and modern. In 6th class, you learnt about ancient history. Then in 7th class, you all learnt about medieval history. And now in 8th class, you all are going to learn about modern history. Now begin with the chapter there. As the name of the chapter is a period of transition. So what does transition means? Transition means change from one state to another or from one era to another. So in this chapter, we will learn about the changes that took place from medieval period to modern period in Europe and its impact all over the world. The transition from the medieval period to the modern period in Europe was a gradual process and did not happen abruptly, or we can say did not happen suddenly. The modern period in India began much later than in Europe. In Europe, modern history extends from 15th century to the present day, but in India it begins with the British conquest of India in the 18th century. A number of developments that took place during the period from about 14th century to 17th century laid the foundation of the modern period. Now we move on to next topic, that is sources of modern history. Sources of modern history can be divided into two categories, that is primary sources and secondary sources. So first we learn about primary sources. Primary sources, these are evidences, or we can say eyewitness which was present at that time. We can also say that the primary sources are the original sources or first-hand accounts of an event or a time period in history. Now for example, we can say count here the eyewitness accounts of events, newspaper reports, diaries, journals, letters, interviews, speeches, manuscripts, emails and blogs. These are kind of eyewitness account. Next, we can have in primary sources the autobiographies, biographies and memoirs written during that particular time. Then we can have official records also in this category, such as government publication and census data. Other than this thing, we can have paintings, photographs, films, television programs, and audio recordings of that particular period. Other than this thing, we can have statistical data based on survey, field work, and the opinion polls of the public there. Then monuments, artifacts, coins, and inscription. These are also part of primary sources only. Now move on to secondary sources. Secondary sources, these are evidence of someone who were not present at that time but are still helpful in understanding history. Secondary sources are based on primary sources and they explain, discuss, describe, analyze, interpret or summarize the primary data. Examples of secondary sources include scholarly books such as textbooks, encyclopedias, reviews, and articles in academic magazines and journals. Now, our next topic is characteristics of the modern age. Total 6 characteristics are given in this topic in your book there. In this slide, we will discuss about the first two characteristics, that are industrialization and urbanization. So first, what is industrialization? It is the process by which an economy is transformed from agricultural to one based on the manufacturing of goods. In simple words, we can say that it refers to the large-scale production of goods in a large number of factories or industries. Now, the second characteristic is urbanization. It refers to the movement of people from villages to towns or cities in search of a better quality of life in terms of increase in total income, better living standards, more job opportunities, and many more reasons. Urbanization mainly begins with the establishment of multiple factories and industries and creating a high demand for laborers and workers to work in these factories and industries. Now, our next two characteristics of the modern age are nationalism and democracy. Now, what do we mean by nationalism? Nationalism, it refers to the feeling of intense love for one's own country. It also refers to a feeling of love or pride for your own country. It is a feeling that makes you feel that your country is better than any other country. Our fourth characteristic is democracy. It is a system of government where the people elect their rulers. In other words, a system of government where the citizens of a state exercise power to rule the state either directly or through electing representatives. For example, our country, India, is a democratic country where we citizens vote to elect our government. Here, I would like to remind you of a famous phrase of Abraham Lincoln, who said, "Democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people." Now, the last two characteristics of the modern age are the rise of mass movements like socialism and an increased emphasis on science and technology. Now, what is socialism? It is a system under which factories, mines, rails, roads and lands, these are owned commonly by all the people, not just a handful of them. Here, goods are produced to satisfy human needs, not for sale and profit. It is a political idea that is based on the belief that all people are equal and that money and property should be equally divided. In such a system, the production and distribution of goods and services is a shared responsibility of a group of people. There is no privately owned property. Our last characteristic is an increased emphasis on science and technology. With the coming of the modern age, there was an increasing interest in rational thinking and scientific discovery. as now the people had started learning by questioning, observing, and experimenting. There was a spirit of inquiry among the people as to know that why they are following certain things. Now they don't want to accept old beliefs unquestioningly or without knowing any reasons. To understand events in modern history, we first need to understand what these forces were and how they changed the medieval world. According to the sources, the changes in Europe began by the end of the medieval ages. Firstly, when the feudal system of society began to disintegrate. Now, what is feudal system? It is an economic system that existed during the Middle Ages in which people received lands and production from the landlord and used to work and fought for them. Secondly, with the breakup of the Roman Empire and the attack of the barbarian tribes through most of Europe. Thirdly, because of the churches which discouraged any attempts at scientific experimentation and rational thinking. A new type of social system emerged during this time which led to the establishment of modern age. The first change that marked the beginning of the modern age was Renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth in French. The Renaissance was a movement that started in Italy in the 14th century. There was a revival, or we can say renewal, of ancient learning or classical civilizations of Greece and Rome. The Renaissance gave rise to the scientific method of inquiry, that is, learning by questioning, observing, and experimenting. In earlier times, it was believed that the sun moved around the earth, but scientists like Copernicus and Galileo disapproved this theory given by the church. In this way, Renaissance encouraged people to think for themselves and challenged the authority of the church. It gave rise to new ideas in the field of art, architecture, and literature. Some of the famous artists of that time were Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. And some celebrated authors of that period were Dante Alighieri and John Donne. Then now people began to question everything and did not accept the things as it is. These developments in science, art, literature, and language transformed the culture of Europe. The invention of printing press and discovery of new trade routes resulted in interaction of people with the civilizations of the East. The scholars of that time believed that knowledge should be used for the benefit of man. In medieval times, the church had dominated the life of the people, but people now began to take interest in present life rather than the next world. They also raised questions about policies and practices of the church. Now, two pics are given on this slide. First is of Mona Lisa. It was the painting painted by Leonardo da Vinci. And the second pic is of the Last Judgment, which was a fresco created by Michelangelo on the altar wall of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. Our next topic is Reformation. The Renaissance led to a religious movement in the 16th century known as the Reformation. It was a movement that aimed to reform the Catholic Church. It was started by Martin Luther, a monk in Germany, against the corrupt practices prevalent in the Roman Catholic Church. According to him, the Bible was the only true guide to the teachings of Christ. In medieval Europe, the Roman Catholic Church was the highest authority for all Christians. Many Christians that time were troubled with the widespread corruption within the church. Now, the people felt the need to bring major changes. It was during these times when Martin Luther questioned the supremacy of the Catholic Church and its Pope. As a result of Reformation, the hold of the Church on the people declined. At the same time, Martin Luther paved the way for the establishment of Protestant churches, which was a separate division of Christianity. Finally, in this way, two developments took place in Europe through Reformation, that is Protestant Reformation and Catholic Reformation. In other words, we can say that there was a split in Christianity. Reformation also led to reforms and changes within the Roman Catholic Church. Now our next topic for today is the voyages of discovery. Till the 15th century, the centuries-old trade between the eastern countries and the western countries was controlled by the Arabs. The Arabs, they used to take spices, textiles, sugar, indigo it was used for dyeing cloth, and saltpetre, which was used to make gunpowder. They used to buy these things from India and other Asian countries by sea to ports on the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. The goods were then carried over land to Europe. But the rise of the Turks in West Asia in 1453 disrupted this well-established trade. Goods now could no longer be taken safely over land to Europe. So this pushed the seafaring countries of Europe like Portugal, Spain and England to discover a new sea route to India and the eastern countries. The monarchs of Portugal, Spain and England, they sponsored these voyages of discoveries. So four sailors we will discuss here. First was Christopher Columbus. He sailed westward in 1492 to discover a sea route to India. He believed that he had reached the east when he had actually discovered an island off the coast of North America. Then the second sailor was Bartolomeu Dias. He was a Portuguese sailor. He reached the Cape of Good Hope in the southernmost tip of Africa in 1487. The third Portuguese navigator was Vasco da Gama. He rounded the Cape of Good Hope and reached Calicut in the western coast of India in 1498, and in this way he established a direct sea route between Europe and India. Next is Ferdinand Magellan. He was also a Portuguese sailor. He was in the service of Spain. His ships sailed around the world to come back to Cadiz, the very point from where the expedition had started. In this way, his expedition proved that the world was round.